Okay, here's my beef with The Walking Dead. Don't really love the show. It's just not my brand. I don't get super attached to things that are really nihilistic in style. I don't really love watching things that are just so gosh darn depressing. But then again, that's just me. That's not my style. That's not the flavor that I really enjoy. There are those of you out here who are watching this that really love The Walking Dead. All the power to you. That being said, there are definitely problems with The Walking Dead. And honestly, in my opinion, there are some issues with the show that will not ever be able to be fixed because of decisions that the show creators have made. So without further ado, let's go ahead and figure out what the problems are with The Walking Dead. Problem one is that there isn't a hero to root for. Think about all the seasons of The Walking Dead that you have had the privilege or the curse, depending on how you feel about the show, to watch. What's the common theme? Here, let me go ahead and show you what it is that I mean. Just look at this cast right here for an example. On the left, you have Rick. In the middle, you have Glenn. On the right, or at least on my screen, it's the right, you have Herschel. Now go ahead and tell me what it is they all have in common. I'll give you a second. Are some of you guys stumped yet? Let me go ahead and make it really easy for you. Bada boom, bada bing, bada bam. Each of these characters that were central to the story and had honestly a pretty good following by most of the fan base, in that most of the fan base liked them, are now dead. You see, The Walking Dead has an issue, and that issue is an iteration of something that I like to call the Shogun problem. Now, for those of you who don't know what the Shogun problem is, let me go ahead and explain it really simply to you. This is going to be very top level. For those of you who watch anime or know what anime is, what you may not know is that there are different types of anime. One of those types of anime is called Shogun anime. It's very much this Naruto and Goku, Dragon Ball Z type feel to it. Basically, what the Shogun problem is that there's an individual, your main character, who has to face villains or problems with different power levels. Traditionally, in most stories, power level goes up to heighten the stakes of the story. This is why, for example, for those of you who watch Naruto, he starts out with facing really low-level people like Zabuza, who really is just a glorified ninja with a sword. And then at the end of the series, him and Sasuke are going at it and blowing up entire mountains and statues. The way that this relates to The Walking Dead is that The Walking Dead relies on shock value in order to hold its viewers. In order to have you enveloped into the story, The Walking Dead has to kill people at unexpected times in unexpected ways in order to grab your attention, because you're always going to be riveted on the story and you won't leave because you want to find out what happens next, because it's such a page turner or it's such a binge watcher. The problem here is that once you do enough shock value, people get really used to it and it stops becoming shock value and it just becomes, I wonder who they're going to kill next. Let's take a look at who's left. If you're looking at the lineup, who is it here that you would really root for? Looking at this lineup, who is it that you really think is a hero that the show can really rely on and stabilize and gather around? It's definitely not Eugene. Eugene's been kind of weird for pretty much the entire show. So me personally, I'm not going to put it around Eugene. And objectively, I don't think you really want to put it around Eugene either. The problem with Carol is that Carol wasn't in the show for a certain portion of it, which, while the past shouldn't matter now, Carol has shown to have a history of being a psychotic maniac and not really being able to control her emotions in any way, shape, or form. Plus, she's got quirks that don't really make her fit as a main character. Carol does really well as a wild card. She does really well as someone who you know is not ever going to do anything rational, even though she tries to come across as a rationalist, as a survivor. She's not ever going to be rational. She's going to do things emotionally, and it's just going to pop off every once in a while and kill a random character for some reason. Ezekiel's a really good supporting character, but we don't know enough about him, and he's really not important enough to the story to really make a central character, so I don't really see The Walking Dead going in that direction either. And then we have people like Maggie. Maggie is one of those characters that I'm actually really sad about because she could have gone in really good directions, but after the death of Glenn, the show creators really decided that Maggie was going to be really vindictive, really spiteful. Which, here's the thing, I understand the reasoning for it. It's a zombie apocalypse and she's not going to be a pretty little angel. But the problem is this shows character regression instead of character progression. She doesn't end up advancing or becoming better at anything. In fact, you see a lot of the things that made her a really lovable character, how much her and Glenn interacted, how much of a different personality was she from the rest of the group because she was a good person as compared to the rest of the group being just sort of like this battle-hardened group of, I don't even know what you would call them. Really, thugs would probably be the only word that you could use about the group. And then she ended up becoming just like them, and it's kind of boring, and it doesn't really make any sense. Now, keep this in mind. Most of the people who watch The Walking Dead love Daryl. And because they love Daryl, and because they love him in his niche, it's very unlikely that they're going to pull Daryl out of his spot to become the main character. Daryl is one of those characters who has formed a cult around his personality and around what we don't know about him. Because we don't know anything about him, that's what makes Daryl so intriguing. He's skilled, he's smart, he's also extremely sarcastic, and he has a personality that is very distinct from the other characters. And a lot of that mystique comes from the fact that we don't know anything about him. And so because we don't know anything about him, it's very unlikely that making him the main character would end up endearing him to us anymore. In fact, it probably would make us not like him as much. Problem 2. The story has no more themes to explore. Remember these guys? Yeah, they were really scary at one point in the show until we realized that they move at about the speed of, half a mile an hour. And ever since we found that out, really, the zombies haven't been a threat to anyone at all in the entire show. For being the main problem that has brought the world crumbling to its knees, they've really relegated the zombies to the very back seat of the entire plot. And to be completely honest with you, zombies are pretty much at a standstill because there's not really anything else that they can do with them until they reveal more about their backstory. A little bit more on that later. And so at this point, they're really just kind of a comical set piece. But Jackson, what about all the evil psychopaths on the show? Aren't they interesting? Here's something that you need to understand about a psychopath. They're not interesting. The rationale behind a psychopath and how they became that way are what's interesting. You'll notice the most exciting thing about the governor is how he became the governor, not what he actually did as governor. In fact, as governor, he actually became kind of an annoying character. He just would not leave the main group alone, and his obsession almost made no sense. And so because his obsession made no sense, you got really irritated and bored of him, and everybody was so glad when he died because they all hated him. It's the same exact thing with Negan. The reason that Negan is so good as a character and as a psychopath is because you don't know anything about him and you want to find out more about him. Take away Negan's backstory and what do you have? You have a power-tripping, sarcastic, bat-wielding biker who talks a lot of smack. That's really all you got. And then you have Alpha. And here's the thing about Alpha. She's probably the weakest villain out of all three of those psychopaths. Alpha feels less like an intelligent psychopath locked in permanent combat with the group, and more like a really creepy spin put on by the show creators to go ahead and make zombies more interesting. And honestly, it doesn't work that well, which you see reflected in a lot of the viewership of The Walking Dead. And then you have all the communities that they keep ruining. To be completely honest with you, the whole portrayal of communities in The Walking Dead is somewhat bizarre. They'll set up things like Alexandria, which would honestly never really happen in a dystopian future if you really put some thought into it. I mean, honestly, how much power do you think the small portion of our population now who are cannibals would really be able to amass in the zombie apocalypse? They're going to get eaten just as much as the people who aren't cannibalistic are. When it comes to the hilltop or the kingdom, they're fine, but they really don't go very deep into the aspects of how life in the zombie apocalypse in a community would really be. Most of the time when they're in the community, the viewer is actually just super irritated because they're waiting for things to happen. And to be completely honest with you, I can't tell if the prison is actually a prison or if it's just my little brother's room. Problem number 3 is that the story only has 2 modes and emotions, sadness and depression. I mean, honestly, if looking at all these faces doesn't make you want to take a bath with a toaster, I don't know what will. One of the fundamental problems with the show that I expressed earlier that was subjective but also can be something objective is that the show is far too nihilistic even for its own good. I understand what the show creators were going for. They want it to feel really gritty and they want it to feel really realistic and they want it to feel super hopeless, and they want you to really get dragged into a world where civilization as you know it has been destroyed by zombies and all of your friends and family are dead. I understand that's what they're going for. The problem comes in that when they're doing this, they really just make all the characters seem really one-dimensional. Every single person in the show just seems hyper-depressed and super manic. The problem with making the show so darn sad is that you end up alienating a lot of your audience who isn't that sad all the time. A lot of these characters come off as really unrelatable because none of us have experienced those things. And the problem is the more unrelatable you make the character, the less your audience is actually drawn into the story. The actual use of the emotion of sadness actually tends to alienate more than it does bring viewers in. There's nothing really happy about almost the entire show, and I think objectively you can say that it actually does the show a huge disservice. Problem number 4, there is no good way to end this story. The way that I see it, the writers of the show really have 3 options as to how this is all going to end. Scenario 1 is that everyone dies, and honestly, this doesn't seem too far out of reach. They've done a really good job of eliminating all of the original cast anyway. The only real benefit that this ending serves is for the writers, because it ends up tying everything up in a really nice, clean bow, and then the writers don't have to worry about it anymore because everybody's dead and everybody's a zombie. Scenario 2 is that they find a cure. This is highly unlikely, and the reason that this is highly unlikely is because they've done almost no work into discovering what actually caused the zombies in the first place. And if they're not going to do that work, What makes you think they're going to do any of the world building to actually find the cure? Especially if we have no idea where the zombies come from and it's like season 9. Scenario number 3 is what I think is most likely. They get canceled. I'm sure that you know that the hype for The Walking Dead is not nearly as good now as it was 5 or 6 years ago. And even though I know they have a ton of content that they could potentially go through, I don't think they have a lot of people who are going to sit through all of it. Once they drag past season 5, they really start just spinning in circles and they get caught in the mud and they just kind of feel like they're doing the same things because there's only so many ideas that you can really come up with in a zombie apocalypse, especially one as depressing and nihilistic as this. And honestly, this might be really merciful in a very tough love kind of way because it allows a lot of the open questions to never be answered. And so the writers don't have to actually worry about all the things they've written themselves into a corner on. And the fans can go ahead and imagine any reality that they want, and then they can just apply it to The Walking Dead, and then they'll remember it in a much more favorable light than if they botched the ending. Which leads me to my 5th point. The fans no longer care. Obviously, there will always be hardcore fans that always will watch The Walking Dead and will buy all the DVDs, and they binge it every single week of their life. I understand that there are those fans. Trust me, I'm the same way with my shows. There are the fanatics that are going to buy all the box DVD sets, and they're going to go to every single convention. There's the trendy people who are just hopping on it because it's a really popular show and they don't want to be left out of all the people who are talking about it. And then there are the normal people who are just looking for a show to watch and they get really interested for a minute and then they realize the show's kind of going downhill and then they jump off. Just in my personal circle, I know nobody who still watches The Walking Dead. 0 people that I know still watch The Walking Dead. And out of my really close 10 friends, I'd say, in high school, every single one of them were watching The Walking Dead at some point. But now none of them watch it. And the reason that they give me for not watching it is usually the same across the board. The show is boring. I think something that fans need to understand about The Walking Dead is the reason that they're in this position where fans are leaving them in droves is because they chose the wrong avenue. I'm personally okay with very niche stories directed at very specific people. I think that's how stories are supposed to be told because all of us are different and we relate to different things. I don't mind the zombie niche at all. In fact, I don't mind the zombie angle. The problem is that TV is meant for a general audience, whereas books, the literary functions, are meant for a narrow audience. And so the comic book versions are doing really well still because they're very flexible and the audience loves them. The problem that you end up running into is that because they chose such a niche audience and tried to expand it to the nation, it worked really well for about 30 seconds. And then all of a sudden, after 30 seconds, Western media at least no longer cares about the content. It's because the content is shallow and it's really easy to get through and it becomes very repetitive. Now, in my personal opinion, I don't believe the show can be saved. I think they've killed too many people. I believe the fans no longer care. And I believe that the show no longer has any fresh ideas on a zombie apocalypse show. I believe that they've done all the tropes. They've done all the cliches. There's nothing left. They've met all the psychopaths. They've met all the weird people. They've killed all the zombies. They've stayed in different places. They've had the different love triangles. And now the main character himself in the very beginning of the show is dead. Why would anybody want to follow that anymore? Again, this is my opinion based on objective things. This series is going to be my subjective take off of things I can objectively ascertain. But in my opinion, it's a thumbs down. They need to kill it. Thank you guys so much for watching. Make sure you like, subscribe, and comment below, and I'll talk to you later.